All right. If everybody is ready, we're going to get started here. We're going to begin today's program by acknowledging that we are gathered on the homeland of the Séliš Bay people at a place they named Timson Clee. And I'm just remembering that I need to record this, so I'm going to start over again.
Recording in progress.
There we go. Okay. So we begin today's program by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the homeland of the Séliš Bay people at a place they named Timson Clee. Their example as the original stewards of this land guides our work today. Travelers Rest Connection is committed to respectfully sharing the history and contemporary culture of the indigenous people who lived and traveled through the ancient crossroads on this land. We learn from many indigenous artists, elders, and organizations, and we invite you to learn from and support them as well. Thanks to everybody who makes these programs possible, the members of Travelers Rest Connection, sponsors like Montana Public Radio, and MCAT's Missoula Community Media Resource, which provided a media assistance grant to record this session. Since most of us are on Zoom today, just a reminder that it's helpful if you keep yourself muted. Video on or off is up to you. Being mindful of everybody else's bandwidth. So if you're leaving your video on, no jumping jacks, please. We will monitor the chat for questions. So if you have any questions or technical difficulties, please type them into the chat and I'll keep track of that. And then we'll take some time for questions at the end, if that's all right with you, Sneed.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce Sneed as one of our favorite speakers here at Winter Storytelling. We've heard stories about travels all over the world for birding and bonding with his son as well. And today we're excited to hear a little bit maybe about his newest book, which I've got here, Boomers. I love that the subtitle on this, Birding for Boomers and Everyone Else Brave Enough to Embrace the World's Most Rewarding and Frustrating Activity. So I think that's pretty good. I'll let Sneed tell you a little bit more about himself, and welcome, Sneed.
Well, thank you so much, Molly, for inviting me here today. It's great to see all of you, or at least sort of see all of you. I was actually really looking forward to doing this in person today, but I'm very grateful that we can do this by video and avoid some car wrecks and broken hips and things like that. So very delighted to be back doing this wonderful series of winter programs that Travelers Rest puts on. The title of my talk today is Birding for Boomers, but don't worry too much. I'm not just going to talk about the book. I'm going to tell some storytelling about how the book came into being, but also talk about just some of the challenges and joys of birding. To start out, I'd like to ask you all a few questions. Again, this works better if you're right in front of me, but raise your hands, at least to yourselves, if you are already birders. Okay, now, if you are a birder, raise your hand again if you didn't get into birding until you were a little bit older, let's say after 40 years old or something like that.
We've got some hands up in the room.
Oh, good, good.
Okay. Some younger birders as well, though, to be fair.
Nice. Now raise your hand if you aren't a birder, but have always considered getting into birding as something potentially fun.
Yep, more hands.
Okay, now raise your hand if you thought this was going to be a wine and cheese party and have no interest in birding whatsoever. Okay, well, I apologize to that last group of people, but as Molly relayed to me, at least a few hands went up who got into birding when they became older. And that is pretty much a typical situation. Though I'm delighted that so many young people are getting into birding right now, you'll remember, you fellow boomers and older people like me, that was not the case when we were growing up. If you ever heard about bird watchers or birding or anything like that, it was usually they were being made fun of, right? They were getting run over by a steamroller in a cartoon, or being presented as these nerdy people with binoculars obsessively tied around their necks. And basically, there was nobody around to just come and take young people especially and say, hey, look, there's a bird over there. See what makes it different from that other bird there, or talk about different species. At least I did not have anyone like that in my life. I'm going to do a quick switch now to my slides, though, and let you know that, let's see, just have to start the slideshow here, that even though I did not grow up wanting to be a birder, I was very interested in animals, like a lot of other kids that I knew. For me, though, I was in a special situation because both of my parents were biologists. In fact, the reason I moved to Santa Barbara, California when I was 8 months old was so my mom and dad could go to school to study biology at the University of California there. My mom would go on to become a lifelong high school science teacher with a particular interest in marine mammals. Well, my dad earned his PhD and was into almost everything. Unfortunately, about the time he got his PhD, my parents got divorced, which was really sad for me, especially because my father moved all the way across the country to where I could only visit him once or twice a year. The only good part of that was that my dad moved to the state of Florida, and it was full of fascinating animals, especially reptiles. In fact, every weekend, my dad and I would jump into his beat up old pickup truck and we'd drive around looking for snakes and lizards and alligators, and more than anything, turtles, which were much easier to find back then. Needless to say, all of this biology exposure influenced me profoundly. When I went to college myself, I didn't hesitate to study marine biology. And it wasn't until afterward that I decided, I don't think I'll continue on the biology track. I want to be a writer instead. Now, that was much easier said than done. In fact, it took me 8 or 9 years to sell my very first book, which was a book called Sea Snakes. But after it came out, I quickly realized that I wasn't content just researching books by going to the library and reading scientific articles. I did that stuff, but what I really wanted to do was still get out into the field and accompany biologists and see what they were doing firsthand. And so over the next 10 or 15 years, I took big research expeditions to places like Monteverde's cloud forest, Australia's Great Barrier Reef, and even the deep sea floor off the coast of the Bahamas to learn about and see bioluminescent animals. Now, all along the way, I did see birds, a lot of birds, like this blue-crowned motmot, which now has a different name down in Costa Rica. I also wrote a few bird books along the way, including Beaks, which is still probably my best-selling book that I've ever written, a book called Birds of Prey, a look at daytime raptors, and even an adventure YA thriller called Flashpoint. It wasn't until I was working on a book called Firebirds that I've talked about here in this series of lectures before, though, that I got seriously interested in birding. How'd that happen? Well, a couple reasons. One is when I write a book like this, I like to take as many of the photos as possible. And so my son and I started going out into the woods, especially the burned forest, to try to find birds and photograph them. Of course, whenever we did, we would have to try to identify them. Well, my son was all over this process. And quickly we began going out birding on a regular basis. He's on the left there, that's Braden. And often we were within the company of his good friend, Nick Ramsey, who lived at MPG Ranch right across the valley from where Travelers Rest is, and was already a phenomenal birder by age 10. So we started birding more and more. And then my wife, Amy, did something pivotal. She rented a movie called The Big Year. Now, raise your hand if you've ever watched The Big Year. I've mentioned it before in past lectures, so I hope everybody here has watched it. So a hilarious movie about three really competitive birders who try to set the record for the most species seen in the US and Canada in a single calendar year. The movie's hilarious, but this big year thing is a real thing. And after we watched the movie, Braden said, "Daddy, we should do a big year." So we did one at first, and we got maybe 120 species in the first year. But a couple of years later, we looked at each other when we were more experienced birders and said, we should do a more serious big year. So I arranged for us to go on a few out-of-state trips, but we began our big year not far from Travelers Rest on the coldest day of the year in 2016. I think it was like minus 20 degrees when we woke up that morning, but never fear, we saw some birds. And in March, we took the first of our 2 trips out of the state. The first one to Arizona, and Arizona was fabulous. We saw birds we'd never imagined down there, like cactus wrens, curve-billed thrashers, and the spectacular bird, the vermilion flycatcher. I mean, there were so many birds down there that we even spotted a greater roadrunner behind a gas station in downtown Tucson. A few weeks later, we flew to Texas, where I had a little bit of work, but we went early so we could visit several birding places, especially a spot called High Island, which is actually mentioned in the movie The Big Year. And tens of thousands of birders come here every spring. Why? Well, this map shows it why pretty well. Many of our summer breeding birds actually spend their winters down in the tropics, Central, South America, or Mexico. But come springtime, many of them kind of make their way up to the Yucatan Peninsula. And then, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but they go right across the Gulf of Mexico to the tip of that arrow point there, which happens to be High Island, Texas. So birders congregate here because it's one of the best places in the country to see things like prothonotary warblers and black-throated green warblers and summer tanagers. There's also a phenomenal rookery there where wading birds like roseate spoonbills breed. And Braden and I just had an incredible time there. And by the way, we'd set a goal that eventually reached 350 birds. That's how many species we wanted to see for our calendar year. Unfortunately, our birding was interrupted by a surprise trip from my in-laws to the Galapagos Islands. I know, it's not unfortunate at all, is it? Of course, the Galapagos is well known for the tortoises that live there, but it's also well known for things like blue-footed boobies and magnificent frigate birds, the world's only tropical penguins. And while we were down there, we ran into this guy called Chuck or Charles or something. Charles Darwin, I think, might have been his name. And he told us about these little group of birds, the finches there, that eventually helped him tease out how natural selection worked and created and led to evolution of species. So that was great, even though the birds of the Galapagos did not contribute to our big year list. We finished out the year on Christmas or New Year's Eve with our friend Nick Ramsey, and we went out to the Maclay Flat area where we had this amazing encounter with a northern pygmy owl that landed about 15 feet from us. And by the way, this is a really good year for seeing northern pygmy owls. So keep an eye out. They're only about this big, so look for any little lumps you might see on branches. I saw one yesterday, in fact, out at Council Grove. But anyway, did we reach our goal of 350 birds? No, we did not. But we got to 337, which we were pretty pleased with. And of course, the number didn't matter at all. What mattered is that we'd had this incredible time together as father-son and meeting a lot of other people, flying to different parts of the country. We also, this big year, turned us into really serious birders for the first time, because we spent so much time birding that year that it doubled, tripled, quadrupled our knowledge of birds just in that one year. I, of course, got some books out of the big year, too, including my first adult book called Warblers and Woodpeckers, A Father-Son Big Year of Birding. A children's book I wrote called Woodpeckers, Drilling Holes and Bagging Bugs. And a book I'm very proud of, One Iguana, Two Iguanas, A Story of Accident, Natural Selection, and Evolution, which sprung from our visit to the Galapagos. And a book called Waiting for a Warbler, which is about spring migration. And after that big year, I thought pretty much that for Braden and me, the sky was going to be the limit. We were just going to keep getting better and better at birding until we were the greatest birders in the history of the universe. Well, for Braden, he's kind of gone onto that track. In fact, he's had amazing birding experiences since our big year. He's gone out banding birds. He's helped me lead school children on field trips into the burned forest and other places. And his passion for birding helped him get a full scholarship to the University of Maine, where he's had incredible birding experiences, including starting UMaine's first ever birding club, which has been a huge success. And he graduates this year, believe it or not. And I have no doubt he will continue his life on an ornithologist path. So it's worked out great for Braden, but my own path didn't quite go as well. Oh, and by the way, this is Braden and his friend Nick Ramsey now, who are both incredible birders. But as far as my own path of birding, I took a kind of a different track. Let me find this here. Oh gosh, okay, oh yes. And this is after my big year. So I'm reading from my book, Birding for Boomers now. Unfortunately, the following year, after our big year, disaster struck. Up until then, my sensory systems had functioned fairly well. Sure, I had suffered moderate tinnitus or ringing of the ears since my early 20s, but that didn't seem to impact my ability to hear birdsong. However, the summer after our big year, Braden, his birding buddy Nick, and I were all visiting Bedoin National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Montana. I had pulled over our intrepid minivan so that we could listen at one of the marshy locations around the lake when Nick shouted, "Cedrin!" "I hear it," Braden joined in. I had my window rolled down on the correct side of the car and didn't hear a thing. At first, I thought I'd just missed it. I was the driver after all and had other duties to attend to. But when the wrens sang again and again, my ears didn't register the tiniest blip. Over the next few months, I realized that I was missing more and more bird calls, especially in the high frequencies. I tried to tell myself that maybe I had too much earwax buildup, but after getting my ears cleaned, a growing, sinking realization settled in my gut. My ears were shot. Looking back, there had been warning signs from my wife's mumbling, to the fact that my stereo didn't sound as sharp and crisp as I remembered. It wasn't until I had trouble hearing the entire call of a chickadee, however, that the full impact of my loss slammed into me. I took it badly. I shook my fist at the hearing gods. I cursed my late father for taking me out to shoot shotguns without ear protection. I lamented long evenings listening to the live version of the Rolling Stones' Midnight Rambler through headphones with the volume cranked up. Finally, I got fitted with a pair of hearing aids. So here I was on the cusp of becoming the greatest birder in the history of the universe when I had this giant obstacle that was plopped down right in front of me. And I got to tell you, quite seriously, it was quite a blow. And I think it's the kind of blow anyone feels when they are suddenly faced with the fact that they have lost the ability to do something permanently. Now, don't get me wrong, the hearing aids did help a lot, but they didn't entirely fix the problem. One thing is that if your hearing is fried totally at certain frequencies, that hearing is gone, no matter how loudly you crank up your hearing aids. Another thing is that once your hearing begins to slip, it often changes a lot from year to year. So let's say you hear and learn the song of a Townsend's warbler one year. Well, there's a good chance the next year that warbler is going to sound quite a bit different. And that's not to mention the different brains that we all have. While Braden and Nick, for instance, can absorb bird song like that, me, I really have to work at it. In fact, I often have to listen to one 30 or 40 times to learn it, and then I'll forget it again anyway. But another tool did help me with this hearing loss. I'm going to hold up my phone to see if you can even see it on here. And it is a tool that is part of the Merlin app called Sound ID, right? If you already have Merlin, it's already on there. And this is an amazing program. In fact, it's the only good use of AI that I have found so far. And what it does is you go out there and you can just start it recording, and it listens for all the bird calls around you and identifies them all on the fly. Now, it's not perfect. It gets things wrong sometimes. And if you're not close to the bird, it often won't pick it up. But this reopened the world of birdsong to me, which is so important for birders. Because while we all learn to bird by sight, usually, the more we bird, the more we learn that to really identify and recognize a lot of birds, you have to hear and recognize their calls. Why? The reason's simple. You don't see a lot of the birds. They're high up there in the trees or down in the grass. And so, but the hearing aids combined with Sound ID really helped me start enjoying bird calls again. And the way I use Sound ID, I never use it alone to identify a bird, but it does alert me to calls that I'm not hearing and what to look for. Or if I think I hear a particular call, it can help confirm it for me. So that has been a huge breakthrough for people with hearing disabilities. Now, fast forward from all this to January 2020, 5 years ago. Well, my son Braden and I had just returned from a month-long trip to the Middle East. I was invited to speak at a school over there in Israel, and Braden and I went a couple weeks early to explore the country and the neighboring country of Jordan. And of course, we saw a whole lot of birds. But we got back to Montana right before you know what hit, COVID, right? And I got to say, and you might agree with me, that Montana was a pretty good place to be for the pandemic. Why? Because we have all this nature accessible to us. In fact, that year, Braden and I birded more than we ever had before. And as things gradually started opening up again from COVID, an interesting thing happened, and I started getting invited more and more to birding festivals to speak and to lead birding groups. Now, first, I faced this with some trepidation. I thought, well, wow, do I really know enough to lead another group of people out birding? Well, to my surprise, I did. But every time I went out, I was dealing with my hearing problems. They weren't the depressing thing they had been at first, but I still had to deal with them. And the year after COVID, it occurred to me, gosh, I'll bet a lot of other people are dealing with these same kinds of issues. And I thought, I should write a book for how to deal with these kinds of issues. So I came up with the title, Birding for Boomers. And I decided to write out a few chapters of it, and I liked how it was going. It was to the point, but had a lot of humor in it, and I felt it was very relatable to people. I sent it off to my editor, and fortunately, she loved it. But over the course of several more conversations, I realized that I didn't just want to write a book for people with disabilities like hearing or eyesight or knees or hips. I wanted to write a beginning birding book for everyone, regardless of their age or their situation or anything like that. So that's what I did. The beginning of the book, naturally, I talk about how to get into birding. I talk about what you need to bird, basically binoculars and a field guide or an app. That's about it, really. I talk about where to find different kinds of birds, basic habitats like grasslands or deserts or forests or rivers, things like that. I talk about whether you should put up bird feeders in your backyard or water features and things like that. And of course, I talked about the original intent of the book is how to deal with things like hearing loss or vision issues or a broken down bod. But I wanted to take those disadvantages, or I should say challenges, to another level. I thought to myself, okay, well, what if you're gay or trans? How does that impact your birding, especially the safety of birding, right? So I wrote a chapter about that. I thought, what if you're Black and birding? That's not something a lot of us birders ever face, but it's a real issue because in some parts of the country, you're literally taking your life into your hands if you go out birding at dusk in a strange neighborhood. And so I want to talk about how you stay safe and help raise awareness about these kinds of issues as well. Now, I gotta say, and the book, I also want to say, I didn't want it to be just a book for the very beginning birder. I wanted to create a resource for people as they got better at birding and moved into medium and advanced features. So in addition to the other things I talked about some advanced topics like, what if you're a photographer? How do you take good pictures of birds? How do you tackle especially difficult bird groups that you want to identify? Because there's some real doozies out there, right? Like shorebirds and sparrows and flycatchers are among the hardest groups of birds to identify. So I talked about that too. I got to admit, though, that my favorite thing to talk about in this book was how much birding can add to your travel experiences. I love to travel, but with birding, it adds some challenges. So let me begin. Do you go on vacation? Be honest. Do you enjoy it? I don't, not really. I used to, but if you're like me, even the word vacation brings up a vague sense of dread and disappointment. Sure, I can still go to new places, visit museums, eat food, look at buildings, but then what? I mean, yeah, it's great. This is where Michelangelo stubbed his toe. Or James Joyce got the inspiration for an excruciatingly dull portrait of a totally narcissistic artist as a young man. But really, the main thing I share with Michelangelo and Joyce is that I will soon be joining them in the grave. Birds, I've discovered, though, turn travel back into an adventure. When the rest of your tour group marches off looking for a six-sided stone in an alley of Cuzco, you can give them the slip and try to discover a giant hummingbird or Peruvian Sierra finch in a nearby park. Instead of whiling away a long layover in the Amsterdam airport, stuffing yourself on poffertjes, you can hop a train downtown and rack up 20 new species for your life list, the list of all the bird species you have seen in your lifetime, including common wood pigeon, Eurasian blue tit, and great spotted woodpecker. So birding can add a lot to travel, but there's a potential problem, right? What if your best friends and your close family aren't into birding? How do you travel with them? You can't just ditch them, right? Because you still want to hang out with them. Well, I talk about that a little bit too. One potential pitfall of fully embracing birds is that not all of your friends and family will understand your new obsession. Some will ask why you need to go birding when you could be playing golf, taking a cooking class, or sleeping in until noon. Some might even complain that birding doesn't leave enough time for you to spend with them. When this happens, do not for a moment doubt the correctness of your new passion. Others, well, they simply have not yet achieved avian enlightenment, or what the ancients simply called birdism. What to do? Well, the first thing, of course, is to reassure the people you love that you still love them, and that your enthusiasm for birds in no way lessens your desire to maintain a close relationship with them. Demonstrate your devotion by occasionally going bowling with them, playing board games, going out to dinner, whatever they enjoy doing in your company. At the same time, start experimenting with ways to involve your loved ones, at least peripherally, in your new hobby. In birdism, we call this showing them the nest. How? Here are a few solid and one or two questionable suggestions. So I do give some advice on that, but let's face it, none of my suggestions may work. You may just never convert some of your family members and loved ones. And that means that you're going to have to do a word that seems dreaded in today's society, and that is called compromise. But never fear, compromise is possible. In my own family, for instance, even though my wife even though my son, Braden, is really into birding and we bird a lot together, neither my other child, Tessa, or my wife, Amy, is fanatic about birds. But we have found some really good compromises. In 2023, Tessa and I fulfilled a lifelong dream of going to Japan for 3 weeks. It was a great trip. We saw amazing sights. We visited temples. We ate a lot of great food. And we rode bullet trains. Before the trip, though, I asked her, I said, well, do you mind if I bird sometimes? And she said, no, not at all. And one reason is because we both like to walk through parks and along rivers and things like that. So if I got caught up with a bird identification, she would just sit on a bench and draw in her journal, or just continue walking and enjoying the nature around us. But an even better compromise was that Tessa liked to sleep in, and I am an early riser. So while she was sleeping in, I would go and look for birds and see things like white wagtails and Eurasian widgeon and little ringed plovers and a hawfinch, and many of these birds were lifers for me. So I'd bird for a couple hours, then go back to our lodging, and she'd be ready to have breakfast with me and go out to start our day. One of the most fun times this really worked out was when we visited Nagano, Japan, site of the 1992 Winter Olympics. Now, we went there so we could visit Zenkoji Temple, but we only spent a single night. And the next morning, I woke up before dawn, as usual, and Tessa was still sawing logs. Well, of course, I had to go birding. The problem? There were no birding hotspots listed anywhere on eBird, which is a program that's very useful to birders as well. But I looked on Google Maps and I noticed a river about 1 kilometer to the east. So I set off through the deserted streets of Nagano. And after about 1 kilometer, I came to the river. And it was awesome. There were walking paths on both sides of it. And I saw some amazing birds, including Darien redstarts, dusky thrushes, and a bird I'd been looking for the entire trip, but had not seen to this point, a bull-headed shrike. And so the trip was just great that way, but we still had another compromise that allowed us both to really enjoy ourselves. Our last full day back in Tokyo, I had a major concern about Tessa. I was worried that she had not gone shopping enough. So I gave her $200 and I said, don't come back until you've spent it all and visited at least 3 stores. So I patiently and fatherly waited for her in the hotel. I actually went to a nearby park that I wanted to see called Shinjuku Gyoen National Garden. And there weren't a lot of birds there, but you can see what a gorgeous park that it was, really a traditional Japanese garden in a lot of ways. And I saw things like eastern spot-billed ducks and little grebes. And as I was walking, a raptor, a bird of prey, flew right by me. And I'm like, whoa, what is that? And I ran after it and I found it sitting on a branch. It was a bird that I love seeing in Montana, but it's one of the hardest birds to see, a northern goshawk. And here it was right in a park in the heart of Tokyo. Unfortunately, I lost this bird from my list about a month later. How's that possible, you might think? Well, the powers of be decided to split this bird into 2 species. So I lost northern goshawk, but I gained Eurasian goshawk, right? What a deal, huh? And so this kind of compromise can work really well on travels. And the trip was so great, I decided to write a book, First Time Japan, a step-by-step guide for the independent traveler. And this is not a typical travel guide. One thing, when I was preparing for our Japan trip, I was looking through these travel guides, and they would tell you things like, turn in your Japan Rail pass and catch the subway to so-and-so. But they wouldn't tell you how to do any of that. And so I decided, there needs to be a guide that tells you exactly how to catch different subways and buy your tickets and find food and deal with the language. So I wrote this book here, which if you're going to Japan, I think you'll find real useful. But compromise has also worked well with my wife, Amy, who also happens to like to sleep in. When we went to Barcelona earlier in the year, I booked our hotel, not by accident, near the city's largest park called Parc de la Ciutadella. So while Amy was sleeping in, I would go here and look for birds. And it was a really good place to bird. In fact, I got 2 lifer birds there, a European Saren and my lifer gray lag goose. And as well as some really interesting things I never imagined, like introduced parakeets, which were roaming all over the park. These are monk parakeets, by the way. So we had a delightful trip there that combined both sightseeing together and the birding that I needed for my soul. Recently, my wife, Amy, booked me a surprise 65th birthday trip out to Victoria. And she said one reason she booked Victoria was that it was a good place for birds. And I'm like, what? Vancouver Island in winter is a good place for birds? Well, turns out she was right. She'd done her research and we had a great time. We'd walk together and look for birds like black oyster catchers and black turnstones. I'd also get up early and look for birds. And one of my favorite birds I saw a lot of were harlequin ducks, which are known for breeding in Glacier National Park in whitewater streams in Montana. Where do they winter? They winter in places like Victoria. I also saw other rarities that come through Montana occasionally that were pretty common there. Things like Pacific loons and pigeon guillemots. And on our last night, I saw a bird that I'd always wanted to see. We were staying at our lodge overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and I looked down and I saw this little speck in the water. So I trained my spotting scope on it. It was a marbled murrelet, an endangered bird that happens to nest in the tops of conifer trees along the Pacific coast. In fact, people looked for these nests for 100 years before they figured out where this bird was nesting. So it was an awesome trip. And so compromise, don't give up on that if you get into birding, but the people around you don't. Well, probably the most important parts of the book, however, have to do with protecting birds, and I saved that for last. Most of you probably heard that in the last 50 years, the US and Canada has lost 30% of our birds. It's just a mind-boggling number. Gosh, and shorter than my lifetime, we've lost more than a third of our birds. It's crazy. And so I devote several chapters on what we can all do to help out birds. This ranges from planting native plants in your yard. In fact, that's one of my favorite ways to do that, to supporting conservation groups and writing to your legislators about supporting conservation and things like that. And so I write about that then, because this is really important. You know, we at our age, we're still getting to enjoy a lot of great birds, but it's important that we make sure the next generations get to enjoy and appreciate and have these incredible creatures that we share our planet with. And so that's how I wrap up the book. And I hope all of you will pick up a copy or pay attention to the cerulean warbler, who actually bought 6 copies to give away to all of his friends and family. And so, you know, I mean, how can you argue with that too, right? But that wraps up what I wanted to talk about for Birding for Boomers. But I'll just point out a couple of my newest children's books. Beaver and Otter Get Along, sort of. Border Crossings, about the difficulties animals face crossing border walls and other things, barriers that we humans create. Like No Other, Earth's Coolest One-of-a-Kind Creatures, which includes a Montana animal. I'll have to let you guess which one that is. And my newest children's book, Defending Nature, How the U.S. Military Protects Threatened and Endangered Species. You can learn more about me at my website, sneedbcollared3rd.com. Braden and I and some of my friends also write a blog together called fathersonbirding.com that shares our birding adventures, and more recently has reviews of birding related equipment or birding books. In fact, just 2 days ago, I posted a review of a brand new book I'm really excited about called The Gull Guide, which talk about your difficult birding groups This one really helps to try to figure out gulls, which often look frustratingly similar to each other. So that is all I have to say, but I would be delighted to entertain some questions right now, which you can either write in the chat room or maybe Molly can kind of pick out people who might have their hand raised and refer them to me here.
That sounds great. So yes, you can type in the chat, or since so many of us are on Zoom today, if you want to turn your camera on and wave at me, we can do questions that way as well today. Sneed, I'm going to start while people are gathering their thoughts. Oh, Mr. Davis, actually, Leighton has a question right off. Go ahead.
Just 2 days ago, we were at Blue Mountain and saw a fellow with this 300 millimeter telephoto lens on his camera. So I had to go ask him. He was taking pictures of a pygmy owl, and he showed us on the camera thing. Remarkable creature. I could hardly see it at the top of the tree. I could see some motion up there, but if you had that big, long telephoto, you could get a pretty good picture of it. Tell me, you mentioned that, I think you said something about pygmy owls being around a lot here. How best to see them? And do you have to find other birds mobbing them?
Good. Those are both good questions. So first of all, this seems to be an extraordinarily good year for pygmy owls. They are showing up everywhere. Often Braden and I have to work pretty hard to find one in Montana during the year. But this year, I've run into two of them in the past week. One was in my neighborhood, and the other one, as I mentioned, out at Council Grove. I didn't know they were out at Blue Mountain, but it makes sense because people have been mobbing pygmy owls out at Maclay Flat. So probably your best way is to go there and look for all the people, you know. No, often when I see them, they're not being mobbed. And because they're so quietly sitting there, you kind of have to develop a search image. Like yesterday, when I was walking through Council Grove, I was just kind of scanning back and forth, and my eye caught a little tiny lump that looked too smooth to be a twig or something. So I backed up and got my binoculars on, and it was about maybe 50 meters away. And sure enough, it was a northern pygmy owl. The one I saw in the neighborhood I was actually looking for it while walking my dog, and I encountered this woman who was carrying her baby. And I said, "Have you seen any little owls around here?" And right when I said that, I glanced up, and there was a northern pygmy owl sitting right above us. And that was great because I got to show her the owl through binoculars. And I think it was just a great moment for her as well. So mostly you kind of have to develop your search image. They're always smaller than you think. So just look for a little rounded lump about this big sitting on a branch. And the more you look, the more likely you are to see them, but you probably won't see them in areas that are very far from coniferous forests. So they seem to like some pine trees or other conifers near clearings where they can scan for prey.
Yeah. Right. All right. We have a couple more questions in the chat here. Fred wants to know how many species you have on your list at this point.
Oh, my life list? I have about 1,030 species on my life list right now. It's funny, when I started 10 years ago, I thought by now I'd be up to 4,000 or 5,000. But it turns out it's harder to add species to your life list than you might think. Maybe more importantly, it's expensive to add birds to your list because it entails a lot of travel. But I have more than 500 species in the US and Canada. And here in Montana, I broke 300 species last year for my Montana life list. And to me, that felt like the biggest achievement that I'd made so far. Yeah. And let's
Yeah,
see. Oh, it says, have you been to the Arctic? Point Barrow was terrific. It is easy to get to via scheduled airline. That is really good to know, and something Braden and I have talked a lot about. But no, we have not been there yet. And I honestly, I don't know if I will get there. You know, you always think you got plenty of time to get everywhere eventually, but voila, I'm 65 all of a sudden. And, you know, I may have to strike a few things off my list, but I don't resent that. I'm very, feel very lucky, fortunate, and blessed to have been able to see the things that I've seen.
The Eiders and Jaegers are terrific, and lots of other old squad things that you don't commonly see.
Yeah, I would love to see that. In fact, I've only seen 1 or 2 Jaegers in my whole life down in San Diego. But my son and I did have a great experience birding the. Oh, sorry, I had to pause because there's been a Merlin flying around the neighborhood. And I thought that might be it, but it was a northern flicker instead. So sorry. But we went back to Boston. I had a conference over Thanksgiving, and we got to bird the tip of Cape Cod. And that was my first experience really getting to see a lot of common eiders. I just loved them. It was so much fun to see them. But I hope I can get to some of these other far-flung places as well.
In the room, yeah.
I live in Upper Miller Creek, and about 3 nights ago, I looked out of my apple tree and I saw 4 birds, and I kind of thought maybe it was some early show-up robins. And when I got my binoculars out, it turned out to be 4 either Gambel or California quail. I was wondering, I remember reading in some old historical stuff that down in the Bitterroot, that one of the original homesteaders there, who also planted the original apple orchard trees, I think it was, well, I'm not sure exactly, but anyway.
We'll get to question in a second, Steve. Go ahead.
Did these birds migrate down there to here? Or do you have people seen them in Missoula?
So this is a great story because our friend Steve is talking about seeing what he thinks might have been California quail in his yard in Upper Miller Creek or Gambel. And that there was talk that maybe these birds were brought here by early settlers in the valley, or how would they have gotten here? But I have to add just to Steve's story real quick, that last week I was sitting in my office and it was like the Partridge Family opening credits, because there was a whole trail of California quail walking by my office. And I think, Dale, how many total did you see? 20 in that covey here in the park.
They've migrated up to Bitterroot. Last year is the first time I've documented them in the park, and this year they were here for about 10 days. Got a lot of photos.
We get this. We've had this covey that sort of appeared in the park and then moved on. But can you talk a little bit about the migration of some of these species?
Yeah, so with California quail, I don't know the whole story, but I know that they were introduced into the Bitterroot and have been there for a long time. And we see them a lot there. I've heard talk of them spreading to other parts of Montana. In fact, it's a little bit of a controversy about whether they should be allowed to do that, as if we might have a choice in that matter. But you saw them in Miller Creek, you said? Yeah, well, I had not heard of any in Miller Creek. You said you're not quite sure they were California quail, though, right? Could they have been gray partridges instead? Did they have orange faces?
Absolutely not on the partridges, because I have partridges in my backyard all the time.
Okay.
And they also had the headgear. And I'm not
the little thing on their, yeah. Well, that's very interesting. That's news to me. And, you know, it's Braden and I, you know, in general, we are not big fans of introduced species or invasive species, especially. But it's really hard for us to conjure up any animosity toward the California quail because they're so darn cute, right? And it's the same thing with the gray partridges. They're just really cute. And by the way, this seems to be an exceptional year for gray partridges. And I don't know if it's because it's been so warm or whatever, but especially with rising temperatures, it wouldn't surprise me at all if California quail really start moving out from the Bitterroot.
The huns, the quail, cottontail rabbits. I had the deer under my tree and I looked out and the little huns were walking and weaving in and out of the deer's legs, bobbing around. They weren't hearing the deer at all. It was one of those big days.
Nice.
Nice.
Let's see.
Yes, there's another question in the room too. She wanted to know about the illustrations for Birding for Boomers.
Oh yeah. I don't know a lot about them, to be honest. When you sell a book to a traditional publisher, they usually hire the artist. And this man was named Tanner Barkin. But he did, I think, just strike the perfect tone for the book. You know, his illustrations, they're fun, they're fairly accurate, and they just go along perfectly with the humor in the book as well. So I felt very grateful that they chose him to do the illustrations. So, yeah.
I don't know if Miss Davis, if you had a question, if there was somebody else on Zoom, you have to unmute yourself. Give us a heads up.
A few years back, we had the privilege of being part of a Great Old Broads for Wilderness weekend along the border. And the base was the Southwest Research Institute. I've been trying to find the proper name. It was the base of the research weekend. We also visited the border wall. And it's in the Chiricahuas in the Sky Island area.
Oh, yeah.
And it was early May, and about 13 species of hummingbirds were migrating through. And there were birders all over the place. It was just a fabulous place. I can't recommend it enough.
Oh, great. Yeah, the Chiricahuas, Southeast Arizona is just spectacular. Braden and I were fortunate to visit there during our big year before the wall got built. Now you go down there and it's just this metal scar running almost from one end of Arizona to the other. And it's a huge concern for wildlife because while most birds can probably find their way through, a lot of mammals just can't get through. And as far as I know, nobody has taken serious action to resolve that issue yet. They're talking about it, but hopefully they will at least establish different passageways for animals to get under or through the wall. So
one of the focus was the jaguars.
Right. And they've been moving into Arizona occasionally. Ocelots also have, before the wall went up, they were establishing populations in some of these mountain ranges, or it looked like they were on their way to doing it. And now I don't think ocelots can even squeeze through. It's possible they might be able to squeeze through in a couple places, but the wall is not just this barrier, it's this no man's land they've scraped on either side. And that also intimidates a lot of the animals, along with traffic. Right?
There was a picture in the presentation taken by ICE of a jaguar in the middle of the night going by. Not somebody invading from Mexico, but a jaguar. It's a rather big one going by. So.
Yeah. So hopefully, I mean, if we have the technology to, send people to the moon, I think we can figure out how to allow animals to go back and forth through the border. Yeah, we'll find out.
That's right. That's right. Any other questions in the room? Okay. Anybody? Oh, there's a hand raised. Doris, I see your hand. Nope. Maybe that was me. Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to let folks know that we do have copies of several of Sneed's children's books here, specifically Woodpeckers and Birds of Every Color. We have some copies of Beaver and Otter Get Along, which we love here because we have beaver and otter in Lolo Creek. And we also have a few copies of Birding for Boomers for folks that would like to purchase one. If you're coming in from Zoom, next time you're in the park, please pick one up. And our many thanks to Sneed for another great program. It's always great to see you and hear from you.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to be with you. And hopefully next time we'll be able to do it in person.
Yeah, that sounds great. All right, everybody, have a safe week. We're back next week with Hassan Davis, who portrays York, the enslaved man who traveled with the Lewis and Clark expedition. This is a really special opportunity to hear from one of, I think, the country's best living historians, and telling a story from a whole new perspective. So we'll be here for that program again Saturday at 11. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Steve.